Okay, let's get started. I'm Jamie Haft, Executive Director of Circles USA, and welcome to our panel with the Board of Directors. We are so lucky at Circles to have such committed, talented people serving on our board. In this session, you'll hear from each board member and have lots of time to ask questions. So feel free to send in your questions as you think of them, and we'll also have a pause midway through for you to ask your questions. Let's start with Joan Kuryansky. Joan last year authored our policy platform, directed our nonpartisan civic participation campaign, and became our board chair after many years of service to the organization. We are so grateful to you, Joan. To frame the panel, would you offer a welcome on behalf of the board and answer the question, how would you describe the purpose and culture of Circles USA's board?
Thank you so much, Jamie. And I think the board will have the opportunity to bring each of their own perspectives, which you will find both enlightening and inspirational. Before that, though, I would like to begin by saying hello and welcome on behalf of the board to all of you who are participating in this conference. I've had the pleasure of meeting many of you in person at earlier conferences, also visiting some chapters, even the launching of one or two chapters, which has been very exciting. And then on our many webinars, which we now have somewhat moved into the Zoom world, of which I must say I am learning every day. But it has really been very exciting to see how we have evolved as an organization and how each of you as part of the Circles family, whether it is as a leader, as an ally, as a coach, have really accomplished so much, both in terms of your individual goals that over the 18 months I know you have worked so hard to achieve, but also in together with allies and staff and other Circle family members, working to create a commitment within your own community to take the steps to end poverty and to build economic security. As we evolved, we are so grounded in the work of our founder, Scott Miller, who all of you know and who is also on this call, and to see how the original vision of Circles, first called Moving the Mountains, has really grown both in impact and direction. And now we are so pleased, and thank you so much, Jamie, in seeing how the leadership has evolved in your work as executive director, and the leadership that you are providing to our very capable staff, of whom I think most of you know. Of course, Kamatara, who is facilitating our conference, as well as Gina Atcher, who probably has more history in this organization than anyone other than Scott. And Courtney for bringing real technical sophistication where needed to our work. We so appreciate both the work that you have done in putting on this conference, which no doubt had its challenges, but the work that you do day to day, your commitment, your passion, your excellence. As a board, we can't say enough to thank you. Your Herculean efforts are manifest every day of our work together, and I think our allies, our chapters, our coaches would agree. So now for the question, what is the purpose and culture of our board? Well, to begin with, we're here to support you, each of you. We are also here to ensure that the underlying financial and administrative girding of the organization is strong. We are here to ensure that legal mandates are followed, but most of all, we are here to fulfill the vision of Circles USA to create living and thriving communities of all families and individuals, and that each of you have the ability, if you will, agency to achieve your own goals and at the same time work with allies and systems and put in place the kind of systemic changes we need to really make our vision a reality. Our board culture is one, I think, that you can say brings a lot of different perspectives and expertise to the table. At the same time, we share the commitment to the vision of Circles, and we revisit our yearly strategies and goals to ensure that they resonate with the Circles agenda. We seek to stay informed about cutting-edge approaches and issues consistent with our vision to end poverty. And we seek to ensure that our actions and recommendations are really grounded in your real-life experiences, whether you be leaders or allies. And importantly, we try to respond to this moment, to any moment in time. But right now, as you've already heard eloquently discussed, this is a time where so many issues surrounding poverty, racism, sexism, and injustice have been laid to bear. We see it as our commitment to ensure that our programming is consistent with addressing those issues. And as a board, we work in a very collaborative and collegial manner. I hope my colleagues will agree. And in fact, we begin each of our meetings with an opportunity to share something that has been good or new in our own lives. We try to operate by consensus with, I think, very good results. And often that is facilitated by a very wise prompt from our executive director. And we continue to expand our board with new members who reflect the richness and diversity of the communities where we work, as well as the nation as on a larger level. And in that vein, I want you to know that we continually are looking at folks who can meet that mandate, and we really would appreciate whatever recommendations you may have of people who you think would both enjoy serving on our national board and bring an important perspective to it. We welcome your recommendations. And so without further ado, with that last final request, I will turn the proverbial mic back to you, Jamie, to continue in our conversation.
Thanks for that framing, Joan. So by way of introduction of each of our board members, I'd like to ask every person to say your name, your location, and tell us one subject or perspective that you represent on the board. And so we can do this as a lightning round. Each person will have 3 minutes. I'll put my hand up when you have 30 seconds, and you'll hear chimes at the end of your time. Jim, would you get us started?
Sure. My name's Jim Masters. I live in Santa Rosa, California, in a continuing care retirement community of 500 people. For you young people, this is what you used to call an old folks home, but now it's has a much nicer name. So you think continuing care retirement community sounds pretty classy. Anyhow, we all have, you have to be independent living to move in. About 450 of us are. And then we have a skilled nursing facility, assisted living, and so forth. So one of the specific things I do as treasurer is just keep track of the machinery that we use for keeping track of the money. Make sure our policies and procedures are something that the auditors are going to be okay with. Any public money, you have to keep track of in certain ways. And I just have a lot of decades working in publicly funded programs. So I try to help Jamie and Gina and the others make sure that we stay straight as far as keeping track of the dollars and so forth. I think the thing that perhaps I hope I bring to the board most effectively is that I spend a lot of time reading and have a lot of history in public policy. So I keep track of the mega trends, if you will, the social trends, economic trends, political trends, and try to figure out how those might impact our work and how they fit together. Are they creating opportunities for us? Are they creating risk for us? It's kind of a big view function, if you will. And I reinforce Joan's point about we're trying to think of things in the social systems and the economic systems that can be changed to enhance opportunity for people. Scott will talk more about the work he's doing in that regard, which I think is an important dimension of what Circles does. And then the last thing that I encourage Circles to do is evaluation. We've got to keep track of what we're doing and how that fits with the trends in society. Are we doing better than, the same as, or not as good as some other strategy or methodology? I do think that the social capital methodologies have great promise and great utility in America. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jim. Jennifer, will you share next?
Yes, hello everybody. I'm so excited to be here. This day is like so energizing to me to get to chat with different people across Circles. So a couple things that I'll share. I grew up outside Detroit. I moved around a whole bunch as a young adult, and now my family and I are settled outside San Diego. We're hoping to have a Circles San Diego chapter at some point, but I don't know, it's taking a little while. But in the meantime, I'm looking forward to getting back to traveling and hopefully visiting more Circles chapters in the next few years. A couple of things that I bring to Circles are, first of all, I come from a faith background, and my faith is really important to me because it really motivates two of my most important values, which are to just to do justice and love mercy. So my 6'8" friends at the Circles chapter in Wisconsin, I'm totally on the same page with you in that regard. Just really important to me, and it's a reason why I just enjoy working in the anti-poverty space so much. Another thing that I bring to Circles is I tend to be a really process-oriented person and really practical. So I love being in the company of these wonderful visionaries on the board. And it's really fun for me to try to help translate these big visions and big, wonderful, audacious ideas into something that's really practical. So I've really enjoyed working on some projects in that area, which would include things like some of the videos that we've done, training, curriculum upgrades, and just other things that will really help the methodology and the model of Circles to grow and just continue to do the great work that has already been happening over the past 2 decades.
Thanks, Jennifer. Scott?
I'm Scott Miller here in Albuquerque. I tried retirement for 3 weeks and I found it wanting. You know, I'm terrible at golf. I'm a casual artist, as you can see, so that wasn't going to go anywhere except on my own wall. And so good news. I just decided, nope, I like working and I like this mission and I want to continue to be part of it. And I helped set up a chapter here in Albuquerque, and they put me in charge of the Big View team. Go figure. So I'm putting that on steroids. So I'll tell you more about this, but we have got an exciting opportunity out here to do something that I've always wanted to do. In fact, all the things I always wanted to do are actually in this idea. So we'll just see how it unfolds, but so far so good. And my role is to keep exploring this whole idea of, you know, we can and we should end poverty in this country.
Thanks, Scott. Christie.
Thanks, Jamie. Hi, everyone. My name is Christie Vines, and I am in Westlake Village, California, which northernmost part of LA County. I often tell people just over the hill from Malibu, so we don't get the benefit of the ocean breeze, but we get the benefit of being proximal to it. In fact, I always with Zoom have to apologize because we actually have homes down the street that burned in the Malibu fires, and so we are having construction. So I apologize if any of that noise is happening in the background. In terms of, I think, my background and how it's relevant to the work of Circles is my background was primarily in global conflict issues and policy. And as most of us know, any kind of conflict, especially global conflict, has incredible connections to issues of poverty and scarcity. And so that was really my formative education, kind of live on the ground, to seeing the impact of poverty in real time, in debilitating ways, and often critically important violent ways. And so bringing that back to a US context was simple because we learned so much doing work on the ground in conflict scenarios. I tend to, because I've had a lot of background in a lot of different spaces, including previous to that, finance, the nonprofit sector, both as an advisor and facilitator of kind of large communal collaborative initiatives. I consider myself a dot connector, is probably the best way to say it, is I tend to see and look for the interconnections and the overlaps of issues that tend to be looked at in isolation. And I often look at them as to how they relate to one another and then impact one another. And so that tends to be the lens that I look through. And when it comes to an issue as complex as poverty, I tend to find that this kind of a lens comes in pretty handy. So hopefully that's helpful to the board. I'm the newest board member, so it's been a pleasure to serve even in the short capacity that I have, and I look forward to continuing to serve.
Thanks, Christie. And Joan.
Thank you. I have been, as some of us have been on the board for some years, I live in Washington, D.C., which is why it's no surprise that I'm particularly interested in the civic engagement work that we have so wonderfully done this year. But my primary perspective is really based on my belief in the strength and challenges that are faced by women and girls in our homes, in our communities, and in the world in which we live. I've been lucky enough to work on local, state, national, and international levels, promoting an equity agenda for women and girls. And I have been I have run organizations. I'm an attorney by trade, I guess you would say, often in remission. And I have been an advocate throughout my life. Some of the issues that I think are so important that really speak to the challenges that women and girls face include, of course, violence at home, on the street, in your workplace, in international trafficking that comes home to roost in many of our communities, facing the kinds of challenges that we see in caregiving, whether we're talking about caregiving for the young or the old, paid or unpaid. Those are all very much issues where women are not only those who are providing the service, but as we get older are the recipients of those services. And aging and the various issues around aging, whether it has to do with economic issues or it has to do with the role of caregiving or staying in control to the end of your life, were all issues that I've had an opportunity to address. And perhaps most important, and that really undergirds so much more, is the economic structures that have resulted in women more than men earning minimum wage jobs, working part-time, and also in dead-end jobs while struggling to try to balance their work responsibilities and their families. And so when I think about the fact that I'd say approximately 85% of the families in circles are led by women, it makes this priority particularly important. We know that there's no one face to poverty, and that if you are a woman who is Black or brown or an immigrant or indigenous or dealing with issues of sexual identity, you are much more likely to be poor than your counterparts. And yet we've seen over and over again how much women can play a role in making life better for not only them, but their communities, innovative solutions. And just here in Circles, we have seen the work that you have done in your own communities, whether it's on childcare issues or fair loan and credit issues. And we'll hear much more about those in our policy breakthrough workshops. But these are all things that you have brought your experiences as women, as mothers, as children to this work. We also know that when women serve on boards or school boards or in the city, in local jobs, things are a lot better because women have been involved and their impact is strong. And so I will just conclude with a statement from our esteemed new Vice President, Kamala Harris, who, as you know, is the first biracial woman, a woman of an interfaith marriage, who has said with the greatest of passion, "I may be the first, but I will not be the last." A good motto for each of us to make as our own.
Thanks, Joan, and everyone. What a wealth of experience. Let's do one more round where we hear again from each of you for just 3 minutes answering a question, and then we'll begin to take the audience questions. So for this next round, colleagues, would you address what should we address? Tell us what we must consider to understand poverty today. What must we consider to best respond to poverty today? And what are the priorities for the board's work in the year ahead?
Who would you like to begin answering that question?
Whoever's ready.
I'll start. I think one of the things we're going to have to understand post-COVID is that the economy is never going to be the same again. And there aren't going to be enough jobs in the traditional sense of what a job has been for a host of reasons that have been accelerated by COVID. Automation, globalization, artificial intelligence, all that stuff is speeding up. And even if you walk into a Walmart or a Lowe's or any of these places, you can see that they've eliminated tellers. You know, you have to check yourself out now. I always want to charge them for that service. Anyhow, that's the future. And so when we're looking into what we're going to do about poverty, it's going to be a combination of strategies in my mind, a combination of groups like us really partnering up with people that can forecast where the emerging economy is going and putting, helping people down specific career pathways that will be there over the next few years. I think another juggling act that we're going to have to learn how to help people with is moving from a W-2 to 1099s. In other words, you may have 3 or 4 contract jobs that rather than having a stable, steady W-2 form. I think we can look forward at some point to the cliff effect being solved. And that's going to make life a lot easier to have the balance between subsidies and work. But I think it's going to be important to advocate that subsidies stay strong while work gets offered. But we can't keep disincentivizing work. It's nuts. And that has to go away. So I think there's an energy now, finally, nationally, to start addressing this. And finally, I think when we're talking about what to really do about poverty, we have got to learn how to get a critical mass of caring from both sides of this equation, people that are in the business sector and people that are in the community sector. there has to be a union to understand that solving poverty is not just a humanitarian cause. It is an economic development strategy as well. And both need to be thought about by both groups of different people who are coming at it from a different reason. So I think whatever we can do to build bridges across sectors is going to be really, really critical going forward.
Thanks, Scott. Christie?
Sure. I put an exclamation point on the end of what Scott just shared. I think there are also two important things that both poverty just in general here in America, kind of the way in which poverty is experienced by people lends itself, as well as a COVID related one. And I think for the first, it's really this idea that at the center of innovation, expansion, disruption, all of these big fancy words that we like to use, especially in the policy and political sectors, as well as the business sector, that the center of all of that, we can't forget that there are people that are impacted in positive ways, as well as in negative ways. And I think we've lost, certainly over the past several decades, we've lost this idea that we have to center people when we think about what it's like to innovate, what we think it's like to disrupt, and even to make more efficacious these approaches and these systems that we're often trying to refine and to improve upon. And so often, as Scott just said, it leaves a certain part of the population behind. And so we have to always be considering them before we decide to make decisions as to which way is the most efficient to move forward. But I also think on the opposite side of that, we often talk about systems and policies in government, but at the core, those are just people too. And I think that should always give us the courage and also the opportunity to actually engage with these individuals on a regular basis. And I think that's what I'm most excited about with the Circles model and the work that Jamie and the rest of the leadership, as well as the Circles leadership around the country are doing, which is really to think about, and in Canada, hi Canadians, in terms of, the fact that these are just people too. And I often say to folks who ask me, how do we engage with these issues of policy? And I say, humanize them, because so often they're trying to do the best they can with the resources and the information and the mandates that they have. And they're limited in their perspective and scope. And so the more we engage with them, the more you lend your expertise, your perspective, and your background, the more equipped they are to make better decisions. And so, this is really a people problem, and at its essence. And I think COVID in particular, my hope is that we move away from a much more expansive economy to a much more localized one. And I think the idea of community is critical here, and that people start to embrace this idea of keeping the economics and the people power at home, local, rather than spreading it out across counties and cities.
Thanks, Christie. Jim.
So the cultural value that anybody can make it in America is a useful thing. It keeps hope alive, and it gives us motivation to get up and try every day. However, I've been involved in public policy and anti-poverty programs for 50 years, and statistically, it is not true that anybody can make it in America. About any given year, at least 30%, and sometimes as many as 50% of people in America are struggling. I do not think we can educate our way out of this, although education is essential. If you do not have at least a high school diploma, you can't get a job anywhere. A 2-year certificate or a 4-year degree, it greatly enhances the probability that somebody else will want to hire you, either because of what you know or because of how you behave in order to fit into their organization. However, while the private sector will continue to be the great bulk of economic opportunities, the rules under which the private sector operates in terms of pay, benefits, working conditions are essentially made by government. Secondly, the private sector, as far as I can tell, has never and will not in the future provide enough good jobs for everybody who wants one. So there's a real role for government in this regard. And I'm going to talk in the next workshop about the American Rescue Plan, where the government is finally stepping up in some very important ways to provide work opportunities for people, in addition to the many other benefits that it provides. But the government role is expanded tremendously in the American Rescue Plan and in the proposed infrastructure plan in ways that we have not seen since the 1930s and the Depression and the New Deal. This is big. It's really big, and it's going to create all kinds of opportunities. And we are just now beginning to figure out how we can pursue some of those. But I think there is an enormous role for government. And we've got things that need to be done here in California. I'm looking out of my bedroom office window at the tops of burned mountains from the wildfire we had here last summer. We should have men and women up there with chainsaws cutting those dead trees down, both to let the new growth come up and to remove the dead trees, which are fuel for the next wildfire. So there are all kinds of things that need to be done around the environment and other aspects of life that only government can do. I'll stop there.
Thanks, Jim. Jennifer.
I'll share two things. First of all, I think that there's a continued importance in storytelling, and I know that's been important to circles for a long time, and I loved the circle leaders who shared their stories already that we've gotten to see, and there's, I know, many more stories that are coming that I look forward to, and I hope you all enjoy as well. But I really feel that with a lot of the polarization and division in America and also in Canada today, that it is often a personal story that is from the heart, which is more effective than anything else in getting people to maybe reconsider their biases or their stereotypes or whatever it is that is preventing them from coming together with others in their community to make real change and to really transform lives. So I continue to be an advocate for storytelling within circles, and I encourage you to also encourage all the people in your chapter to tell their stories. And it's not just the circle leaders, but also allies, your other volunteers, and you as staff members and resource team members. Your stories are also important, and what you're learning and what the ways that your heart is being transformed through circles are super important. So thank you for those who are brave enough to tell your stories, and I encourage those of you who might be ready but a little bit nervous about it. And the second thing that I'd like to share is echoing what Scott mentioned, and that's the importance of connecting with people in the business community. I think this is an area where circles can grow substantially this year, and I'm looking forward to helping in that process. I do interact with a lot of business leaders, and it's so interesting because I really feel that most all of them have a real heart for people who are struggling in their communities, but feel a little bit lost as to how to make that happen. Even something as basic as language. I think that sometimes the language that we might use in circles is a little bit foreign to people in business, and likewise, some of the ways that our business friends will tell stories, it doesn't quite land with those in the social service and human services area. So I think that there's some ways we can improve our messages just to, again, help us to come together and empower people and help them reach their goals.
Thanks, Jennifer. Joan.
Thank you. I think we have to be very cognizant of the time in which we're living, and we need to learn some of the lessons that the experience with COVID has taught us. And we have seen some wonderful individual acts of kindness, some organizational acts of kindness. We have also seen the unveiling, in a way, of the kind of racism that exists in our society, and at the same time, the surge of the Black Lives Matter movement. We have seen women through so many different vehicles, most recently relating to sexual violence. And I think as we develop our responses, we must be cognizant of the impact on these movements and acknowledgement of some of the systemic barriers that so many of us have, and that in our circle's work, we make an effort to promote the leadership of those folks who may otherwise not feel that power. I think one of the videos we saw earlier with Kelly was such a great example of the empowerment of an individual circle's member moving in to even a larger role and contributing even more to her community. I think I echo what Jim said about the government. I think this is the first time in a long time we have the opportunity that not only that the government can play a role, but it can be a constructive role. The second message from that is we get the kind of government that we vote for, and we get the kind of country that we want, in part by whom and why we vote. And I think the work that we began with the Circle Civic Engagement Program in 2020 will be so important to continue both in 2022 and beyond. We have the power to make a difference in this country. I think we see that, and it can be used for good or bad. So I hope that we will build on the work we have done in the last few years to make our voices heard and to encourage others to also be part of that civic engagement process. Thank you.
Thanks, Joan. This is such a wonderful brain trust to help us understand this current moment. Jim, a quick comment.
I'd like to add something following up on the COVID. I don't think COVID is a one-off. I think this was the trial run for an incredible shift in public health that's going to persist for probably forever. The idea that we've lived with is that we have human health and we have the environment and we have animal health. And there is a whole field developing called One Health about the interrelatedness of these, what we have treated as separate domains. In particular, the number of viruses that are shared between humans and other animals. In particular, the number of viruses that are crossing over from animals, whether it's coming from ducks or pigs or chickens or wherever, into the human biosphere. And I think we are going to see pandemic after pandemic. And in that regard, there's a lot of jobs out there for testing and tracing and giving vaccines and so forth. This mitochondrial RNA, ribonucleic acid, mRNA, the vaccines that Moderna and Pfizer have developed are groundbreakers. They are going to open up an array of vaccines for many, many diseases that have plagued humans for centuries. This is an incredible scientific breakthrough, and you're going to see dozens of vaccines coming out for different kinds of health ailments. I think the public health and the health sector are going to blossom in terms of opportunities for people to work. So I just wanted to say, I agree with Scott. COVID has really changed everything in ways that we're just beginning to figure out.
Thanks, Jim. As we segue to our Q&A, that actually began a response to one of the questions in the chat. So audience, please type your questions and I'm going to field them to board members. Scott, would you add on this point about what types of jobs will be available post-COVID? I know Jim mentioned a few sectors, but do you have any other perspective on the jobs for the emerging economy?
I think one major theater of job creation is going to be solo work, the remote work out of the home, for a bunch of reasons, including pandemics. There have become more and more, there's more ease with doing services from the home, getting things delivered to the house, being able to get onto Zoom and do business and all sorts of customer relations. Companies have had a very difficult time with churn when it comes to just customer care programs. And so, you know, in Grants, New Mexico, they lost one of the correction facilities and a couple hundred jobs went away. This is a small town, a couple hundred jobs went away, and they weren't able to replace those jobs. And so SoloWorks was set up through our relationship with the Community Economics Lab. They set that up, and we were in the design of that. But 160 people got jobs in Grants, New Mexico from 26 companies that are worldwide. So it's, when you look at the old days where we used to have an industrial park and try to, you know, persuade businesses to come into our community, now the idea is, can you provide a reliable workforce? And this is where Circles has a unique opportunity to support people with the kind of socialization needs that they're going to have if they work from home, as well as being able to solve the domestic obstacles to working out of your home, especially if you got kids and other things. So I think that's something to really pay attention to. Can we set up the capacity to support people to work out of their homes? Because there's more jobs right now than can be filled in that space.
Can I add to that really quickly, Jamie?
Sure.
Because I think there's another space that we're not considering. And I think one area where, at least in previous generations, we emphasized go work for the corporate sector, the private sector. And I think once upon a time, that was not just an opportunity for wealth creation, but also retirement support. And because that has gone away so quickly, where few, if any, are pension-based anymore, where 401ks are really reliant and then impacted by the swings of the market, this kind of pendulum swing that I think we're seeing with younger generations around entrepreneurship, I think is an incredible opportunity that's not talked about enough. I know I've spent most of the past several months engaging with young entrepreneurs who are thinking about ways of building their own personal wealth, improving their communities through new business ventures, and also ways to change whole ways of doing business and delivering services that is much more local, much more community focused. And I think what COVID highlighted, when we saw these large corporations get increasingly wealthy at the expense of people, I think there is a shift that's happening even in policy conversations about what America will look like when it comes to the future of work. And I think there is such an opportunity, especially when we're looking at single family, single parent households, younger and younger, increasingly younger parents who are thinking about the legacy and impact, not just for themselves, but for their families. And I think entrepreneurship, small business, going back to this idea of small local businesses, is an area where Circles can play a huge role in supporting that within their chapters.
And if I may add something, particularly as we're hearing discussion about this new potential infrastructure bill, that when you talk about changing workplaces or environment, you cannot forget the role that parents, particularly mothers, play in childcare or adult care. And a true infrastructure bill will create opportunities for women to be able to fulfill their responsibilities and opportunities through a changing job market. And with the evolution of more focus on green jobs, which in many ways is like some of our early jobs, but maybe packaged a little differently, this is a time for women to be on a level playing field. And as jobs are created, we need to make sure that women and people of color have the tools and the access to these evolving jobs as we go forward.
I just want to add to what Joan said, that the idea that infrastructure is just roads and bridges is sort of 1950s thinking. Infrastructure includes the social systems, the social arrangements, the social infrastructure that makes the society work, and we need to invest in that as well.
Thanks, Jim. So this was a great focus on the emerging economy. Let's segue to a question that came in through the chat about the ability to have hard conversations in these polarized times. Scott.
Yeah, I saw that question. I think it's important to go back to the circles of commitment that we see in our training material. The idea that people are on a continuum from, I don't believe in gravity, and so I'm going to jump off a cliff and test it out and have an intimate experience with gravity, right? I mean, there's not that many people, in my opinion, out on these outlying positions. They suck up a lot of oxygen in the news and in our conversational world, but I don't believe that there's that many people in the country, and I could be wrong about this, that really don't believe in science at all, and whatever. But I think that the important thing here is to work with people that are in those 8, 9, and 10 on a 10-point scale of being in alignment with what you want to create, rather than trying to push against what you don't want to have. It's just more helpful as leaders to go where you want to go with your vision and get a shared vision with as many people that are in that space as possible. And just know that the noise we've been hearing about anti-science has created such a thirst for science that, Fauci's about to be the most emblazoned image on sweatshirts for the next 10 years. I mean, so anyway, I just think not to worry, it takes care of itself, and go where you want to take your vision.
I'm going to disagree a little bit with my esteemed colleague, Scott.
What's new?
As somebody who works in the dialogue space, it's actually now known from just pure data that we are more divided as a country than at any time since the Civil War. And so I don't think we actually even have I don't even think we have the luxury of just talking to that 7, 8, 9, 10 group. I think the biggest issue that we've had is that we're not crossing those divides. We're actually not willing to talk to the people who may not believe in science when we're a scientist. But what we have found is that by not talking to those people and not including them in the conversations and the dialogue, that what we end up having is this pendulum swing, even at the federal level, where, 1 minute we are, doing progressive policies, and then 2 seconds later, those policies are being undermined and undone because another part of the population felt like they weren't being heard or seen. And they certainly weren't part of the conversation. And I think it goes back to this idea of people. When I worked in DC, during the Obama administration, and while there was such an effort to move the greening of kind of the job market and business and energy, what was often left were the conversations with those who were still working in the coal industry or in the liquid natural gas industry, who all of a sudden, recognized that they had power and influence, band together and actually then lobbied against a lot of those same policies under the Trump administration. And a lot of that was because we're not talking together. There's a lot that we have in common, but there's actually a lot that really separates us. And until we actually are willing to engage with the people that we disagree with, that we don't understand, that we think are actually, on the opposite side of what we believe, as a country, we are going to continue to be divided, and we're going to continue to see that so much of our energy, time, and actually political capital is going to be spent just battling these really big, important issues and not really getting very far.
Mm-hmm. I just want to follow up on what Scott and Christie said. There are a lot of methodologies, courageous conversations, living room conversations, the Othering and Belonging Institute, where you can interact with people and engage with them and have differences of opinion or even disagreements, but without enraging each other to the point where conversation stops. So there are, and I think the Circles chapters operate in this way. In my perception, that you have people with differences of opinion, and yet you can still talk to each other, listen to what the other person says, give them room to express their opinion. I guess partly because I was very active in the 60s when there was a lot of conflict as well. I'm not quite as worried about this as some people are. I think we've got a lot of goodwill and capacity among people, and I'm wondering how many people ultimately won't get vaccinated. Is it the same number of people who didn't get a smallpox vaccination or take a polio vaccination? I don't see much difference between what's going on with the COVID vaccination and these earlier vaccination. efforts. Yes, there's a small group of people who won't do it either for health reasons, for ideological or religious reasons, but that's over time, that is a very small group of people. So, but the point I thought Bruce raised this in the chat, and Scott and Christie have both spoken to it. And it's a very real issue and one that we need to improve our methodologies about how to do this and practice them. We do this once a month at our Rotary Club. We have an issue that's controversial that we have practice conversations with each other around.
Thanks, Jim. What a great spirited conversation. I think we have time for one last question, maybe two. Here it is. Are there any circle leaders on the board, or are they ever brought in for input about the organization and its services? Jennifer, Joan, would you both speak to that?
First, I'll defer to Jennifer, who's working so much more closely with the chapters than I am.
Sure. Well, nope, none of us on the board now have been circle leaders. We would definitely like to have circle leader on the board. This is something we've talked about for years, is how we want to expand our board to include diverse perspectives, diverse lived experiences. I really appreciate the way that Circles has been establishing more regional hubs so that we can start to elevate people's experiences and leadership within the organization. So I will really welcome Circle Leader presence on this board, hopefully soon. But we also do want to be cautious and bring people on the board when that's the right thing for them. We are looking for people with a particular level of experience, and that it's the right fit for their lives to be in this type of a role. So we really try to balance those two things. But diversity is something that we're very aware of and we're working on, and an area where we can do better.
I just want to add a different opinion on that, in that, it's not like this board is the board of General Motors that allocates billions of dollars and decides what the next model of car is going to look like. Circles is a chapter-driven system, and to some extent a staff-driven system. I'd say the board's about third, and we're followers. We're not necessarily, in front of what every two steps in front of what every chapter is doing. We are marveled at the work you're doing out there, but we are observers. So on the one hand, we've had many discussions about having chapter representation, circle leader representation, etc. On the other hand, it ain't that big a deal, folks. It's we're watching what you're doing, not telling you what to do.
Well, we may not totally agree on that. And I think it has been an issue that we have discussed a lot. And we have, despite the fact that we have not developed a system that would welcome direct circle leaders, allies input, we have tried to do other kinds of activities to elicit the opinions of our members. For instance, in our work around our policy platform, we had a committee that was made up of both circle coaches and the board, and I think perhaps some who had evolved from originally being circle leaders. We had a survey that went out to all of the Circles chapters, asking them what would be their priorities in developing a policy platform. And that was the platform that we developed. We got some feedback that certain issues, whether it was education or lending and credit issues, were not part of our policy platform. That was totally a function of who in our chapters and how many chapters responded to helping set that policy agenda. I serve on other boards, and this is often a question in terms of the language is often called client representation. But I think that there are ways, and we will continue to seek ways where we will have more formalized input. But in the meantime, I just want to assure folks that we are always soliciting input that usually comes either through a combined board committee with others or through very trusted voices like Kamatara and Jamie, who have been able to be out front and solicit questions and information. And again, we are looking for new board members, and we would appreciate whatever you could do in making recommendations for that.
Thanks, Joan. Indeed, the pathway to becoming a board member is to become an advisor to the board. And we do staff several advisory committees, as Joan suggested and gave her experience on the Big View Advisory Committee. And so we'll be collecting your information if you'd like to get involved in one of these advisory committees, and we'll be scheduling more opportunities to have interaction with those with lived experiences of poverty with our board of directors. So to close, I'd like to voice this anonymous reflection that came in through the chat. Since being a circle leader for the last 18 months, I've noticed a pattern in the lessons taught. Lots of information about the issues are given and the resources where solutions can be found, and that's great, it's a step, but there's not enough for some circle leaders who need hope. And so by way of closing, Jennifer, would you offer us on behalf of the board some hope for this circle leader and for our whole audience needing to rejuvenate our spirit?
Absolutely, and I appreciate that comment, and I think that we cannot forget the importance of hope, because that is absolutely what keeps us going through hard times. And we've talked about, so far a lot of us have reflected on the trauma, the tragedy, the division that is very real, and I don't want to gloss over that. But we are in a present moment where there is so much change that's possible, and there really is so much reason for hope. For example, I hear a lot in the news, our country's leaders talking about the potential to reduce child poverty by 50%. That is amazing, and that's something that we haven't heard in years. At least I haven't heard that coming from national platforms. It's very exciting. There's going to be funding available. People are mobilizing to work together on a scale that I have never seen before. This idea that, okay, we all get to go back into society. People want to be together, and people have excitement to build our country and Canada, the world really, into a more just and equitable place. And I will tell you something though, even though we have these funds coming, even though we have this effort coming, this excitement, it's not a magic wand. And we, all of us within circles, know that just adding money or adding some volunteerism isn't going to make poverty vanish overnight. We all know that when change comes, it's through relationships. And all of us know that transformational change. We all know how exciting it is to see somebody have that breakthrough. And that's why we're here this week. We can encourage each other on these breakthroughs. We can have our own breakthroughs. We're all on the leading edge of this personally and in our chapters. We know how to come alongside people at circles. We know how to equip people, how to position them to lead their own journeys. And I'm not just talking about circle leaders, that's each of us. So I want to acknowledge each chapter and each person that's here today. You are leading the way. You are demonstrating the transformation that can happen in your own community. So I want you to feel encouraged about that. I've met with so many of you over the past 2 years, whether it's been through the work with video, with Florida, with Green Bay, and the PRL conversations, all the chapters that contributed to the overhaul of the training materials. And I see the hard and important work that you're doing. I know that you're working late nights. This is not a 9-to-5 job for anybody here. It's exciting to hear your stories, and it's exciting to me to share your stories with the communities that I'm in. And as a board, we are here to support you, to celebrate you, and we also want to inspire you. It is time to keep bringing your A game, even though I know it's exhausting, because right now is the time when your community is ready for you. Your community is ready for this transformational change. I encourage you, be there for each other. Take care of each other. Take care of yourselves. I can't wait to see what we all do together.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, everyone. This was a great board panel. Now you have a 15-minute break. So take a pause and then return to your email and click the link, and we'll be continuing with Jim Masters on talking about the American Rescue Plan Act. Thanks again.